Remedy have made some fantastic games over the years, from the groundbreaking slow-mo gunplay of Max Payne to the superbly atmospheric Alan Wake. Control undoubtedly offers the studio's most enjoyable gameplay that they've built since the glory days of Max Payne, but it lacks that cult hit identity of Alan Wake. You play as Jesse Faden, the new director of a secret US government agency, the Federal Bureau of Control. The game takes place in the ever-shifting corridors of the FBC's headquarters, called the Oldest House. Unfortunately, of course, a supernatural enemy has invaded the agency, corrupting not just people, but the very reality surrounding you. And it's your job as the player to try and take back control. Sorry. Within the first hour or so, Control just feels like any other normal third-person shooter. As someone who came into Control fairly blind, but also wasn't a big fan of Remedy's last outing in Quantum Break, it's safe to say I was fairly skeptical of the game at first. However, the moment you gain your first supernatural ability, Control is immediately elevated onto an entirely new level. Jesse gains a form of telekinesis fairly early on, wielding the power to pick up and throw objects at will. And when I say objects, I'm referring to literally every single object in the game's world, from tables to chairs, gas canisters to bodies, and even enemy projectiles. Grabbing an incoming rocket or grenade in midair before firing it back to an unsuspecting enemy never gets old. Control actually provides some of the most impressive physics that I've seen in a video game since Half-Life 2. Almost everything can be grabbed and thrown, and if there's no objects available, Jesse instead just yanks a physical chunk out of a nearby wall. Explosions send particles and environmental items flying in the air. Combat in this game is a real sight to behold. It's not just satisfying to play, but it is genuinely impressive stuff. Whilst the telekinesis launch ability is probably the most impactful of them all, the further the game goes, the more abilities that it dishes out. There's duds like the shield, allowing you to block some enemy shots. However, others like the short dash and especially the ability to hover are real game changers. By the end of the game, you feel like a complete badass, floating and zipping from left to right, throwing projectiles at enemies and popping off headshots. Combat is definitely Control's real strong point. Unfortunately, you're stuck with the service weapon, aka shape-shifting pistol, throughout the game's duration. This unworldly pistol can only be wielded by the director. Hey, that's you. Over the duration of the game, you'll be able to craft alternate fire modes for the weapon, such as a charged armor-piercing pierce shot, SMG-style spin mode, a shotgun-esque shatter form, and a few more. There's only 5 modes throughout the entire game though, and you have to pick from 2 of these to swap between in mid-combat. I spent the majority of my time in the game rolling with the standard pistol grip form alongside the super powerful pierce type. Any attempts to swap these out just felt less well-rounded to me, but that is admittedly going to be personal choice. It's a shame that a wider and more exciting variety of weapons couldn't be wielded. Granted, with your abilities, the environment is pretty much a weapon in itself. Still, however, I felt like the weapon selection is probably one of the game's weaker points. You can find and craft various mods for your weapons and personal abilities, which can be placed in limited slots. These mods generally offer percentile boosts to specific weapon types and abilities, such as 30% more health or 42% headshot damage, etc. They're not really all that exciting, but they do end up making a tangible difference, particularly when stacked. The upgrade side of things seemed a little too safe and uninteresting to me, particularly when considering some of the other stronger areas of the game. Control is a weird game, and it revels in it. Remedy fans fear not, the studio's love for eccentric in-game live action video is still completely here. TVs and projectors throughout the world showcase vlog-style entries from an all-important scientist, alongside a particularly odd Punch and Judy style show. You'll also be constantly asking yourself questions about the game's world, whether it's inanimate objects with extreme magical powers which affect the reality around you, also known as objects of power, or the shape-shifting environments of the game's open world style play space, The Oldest House. Control's story is an interesting one, with multiple twists and turns, and it kept me interested from the beginning to the end. Whilst I won't get into specifics about the game's story, unfortunately, as to try and avoid spoilers, I will say that the conclusion felt like a real big disappointment to me. Remedy seemed to focus on leaving things open for a potential sequel more than providing a satisfying payoff for the myriad of questions that I had leading up to the finale. There's also a couple of story threads which, in my opinion, completely miss their potential and fall flat instead. I absolutely wish I could discuss my vast array of puzzling theories, thoughts and questions here, but the overall narrative is still an interesting one which I think is worth experiencing, and I don't want to spoil that for you. Despite the lack of closure, it is certainly still one of the game's stronger points. Another area of the game which felt like a missed opportunity is the game's monotonous environments. It's here where I felt Control really dropped the ball in reaching the heights of some of Remedy's previous work. The Oldest House is the headquarters of the FBC. It's a series of winding corridors and shifting areas. The game takes an open world Metroidvania style approach with plenty of hidden and temporary inaccessible areas. There's even fast travel between control points which you have to capture throughout the game's environments. As you progress through the story, your new abilities and increasing level of access will allow you to visit previously unreachable areas of the game world. Whilst this isn't a vast, sprawling open world, the areas here feature plenty of hidden corners and world-building collectibles. There's a bunch of side activities to partake in alongside the main story too. However, I did find that about 2/3 of the way through the game, some of the side activities that were thrown at you were a little bit too repetitive. Here's 5 different people to go and kill. Here's 6 different objects to go and find. Oh, and you've done that? Here's another 2 to go and find. It just felt a little bit like filler. The game's open world style is a solid approach overall, but the game's environments just felt a little too samey to me. Whilst Remedy do their best to try and spice up the world's various sectors and areas, with some admittedly being far more interesting than others, it's tough to escape that at its core, the game takes place in what is effectively an office space. Control is at times literally a corridor shooter in the most literal of ways. I encountered a few notable bugs during my time with the game, playing with the day 1 patch installed, I'll have you know. Although some, such as T-posing NPCs, aired on the amusing side, others were a little bit more frustrating. The game's already pretty poor map. It generally does a really bad job at illustrating how to reach specific areas, by the way. Often took 5+ seconds to load in. I'm literally stood there just waiting for my map to load a picture. Multiple times I received time-limited side missions for areas which not only did I not even know existed yet, but which weren't even accessible to me at that time. Also, the nauseatingly heavy motion blur was instantly noticeable upon firing the game up for the first time, something which players aren't able to disable on consoles, alongside a substantial implementation of film grain. This might be a personal preference, but for me, it was bothersome. That said, the game's visuals generally were very strong. I played Control on an Xbox One X and felt impressed with just how superb the overall visual effects and physics were. Combat is intense thanks to a profound array of objects popping off left, right and centre. Fights in Control are a sight to behold, and they only get better as the game goes on. Not only that, but the facial animations are absolutely stellar, often conveying subtle emotions in a surprisingly uncanny way. The game's frame rate was generally decent, holding up pretty well during heavy sequences. That said, I do have to say that I did notice some slight hitching here and there, with larger combat moments causing some visible dips in performance, particularly later in the game. It's also worth pointing out that I regularly experienced a few seconds of heavy stuttering whenever returning to the game from the pause menus. Control is a great game overall, with some elements that are absolutely superb and stand out, such as the heavy level of intrigue throughout and brilliantly fun combat loop. Others, such as the game's conclusion, weapon and upgrade variety, and most notably the environments, ended up feeling a little disappointing for me though. It's undeniably the most fun that I've had with a Remedy game since the Max Payne series. Throughout my 12 or so hours with the game, I had a blast. Control is a significant step up from Quantum Break, that is for sure. It is a game that is certainly well worth picking up before the busy holiday season kicks off. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell button for notifications when we upload further videos. It really helps the channel a lot.